What if the greatest battles of your life were never meant to be fought with fists, arguments, or visible force, but inside the silent corridors of the human mind? Close your eyes for a moment and imagine that every rival you have ever faced, every critic, every competitor, every smiling adversary who shook your hand while calculating your downfall, was never truly trying to defeat your body. They were trying to infiltrate your perception. They were studying your fears, your impulses, your need for validation. They were waiting for you to reveal yourself. And most of the time you did. Power is not loud. It does not announce itself with declarations of war. Real power moves quietly, like a shadow that understands the shape of the light better than the light understands itself. This is the terrain where minds are cornered, where confidence fractures, where alliances dissolve without a single public confrontation. And if you wish to outplay your enemies mentally, you must first accept a brutal truth. The battlefield is invisible, and it is everywhere. In the dimly lit chambers of Renaissance Italy, where alliances shifted like sand and betrayal was as common as prayer, a man observed this invisible battlefield with cold clarity. Niccolo Machiavelli did not romanticize virtue. He did not pretend that morality protected the naive. He studied power the way a surgeon studies anatomy, precisely, dispassionately, without illusion. He understood that human beings are driven not by ideals, but by fear, ambition, insecurity, envy, pride. He saw that control begins not with swords, but with perception. Your enemies are not defeated when they fall. They are defeated when they miscalculate you. The first ruthless psychology trick is this: control the narrative before it controls you. Most people react. They defend themselves against accusations. They correct misunderstandings. They rush to explain. In doing so, they allow others to define the frame of the conflict. Once you are inside someone else's frame, you are already limited by it. Imagine a room where whispers begin about you. Doubts are planted, questions circulate. If you respond directly to each whisper, you legitimize it. You validate the existence of the narrative. But if you subtly shape the larger story, projecting calm certainty, demonstrating controlled strength, allowing ambiguity to work in your favor, the whispers lose oxygen. Humans crave coherence. They will adopt the most stable story available. If you provide that stability, even your critics will unconsciously align with it. Control is not about shouting the loudest. It is about deciding what reality feels like to others. The second trick is colder. Never reveal your full emotional landscape. Emotion is data. Every reaction you display teaches your opponent how to move you. If they know what angers you, they can provoke you. If they know what flatters you, they can manipulate you. If they know what scares you, they can corner you. Consider how often people betray themselves through micro-expressions. Tightened jaws, widened eyes, quickened speech. These are signals. And predators study signals. The mind that remains composed becomes unreadable, and the unreadable mind becomes intimidating. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who does not react as expected. It disrupts the script. Most confrontations follow predictable emotional rhythms: accusation, defense, escalation. But when you respond with calm detachment, when you refuse to feed the emotional fire, your opponent begins to doubt their leverage. Doubt is destabilizing, and destabilization is the first crack in their armor. This does not mean you feel nothing. It means you decide what is visible. The third trick is the art of strategic absence. Most people overexpose themselves. They explain too much. They show up too often. They make themselves easily accessible, and what is constantly available loses perceived value. Scarcity, on the other hand, creates psychological gravity. When you withdraw at calculated moments, when you become slightly less reachable, slightly less predictable, you activate uncertainty. Humans fear uncertainty more than hostility. Hostility is clear. Uncertainty is a void into which the imagination pours its darkest projections. Your enemy begins to ask, what are they planning? Why are they quiet? Did I misjudge them? That internal questioning consumes cognitive energy. While they are busy analyzing you, you are free to observe them. Strategic absence is not retreat. It is repositioning. It is allowing silence to amplify your presence. The fourth trick cuts deeper. Make others dependent on your stability. In every dynamic, professional, social, political, people gravitate toward emotional anchors. If you become the consistent, composed, rational presence in volatile situations, others begin to rely on you. They measure their reactions against yours. They seek your approval implicitly. Dependency is subtle. It grows from patterns. When someone repeatedly experiences you as the calm center in chaos, their nervous system associates you with safety, and safety breeds trust. But here is the darker truth. Trust breeds influence. Once your enemies, or potential enemies, see you as indispensable to stability, their capacity to oppose you weakens. Conflict threatens their own equilibrium. They hesitate, they soften, they reconsider. Power is rarely seized violently. It is often granted unconsciously. The fifth trick is the manipulation of expectations. People do not suffer most from reality. They suffer from the gap between expectation and reality. If you understand what others expect from you, you can weaponize deviation. If they expect aggression, offer patience. If they expect submission, display quiet firmness. If they expect incompetence, reveal precision. The shock of violated expectation disorients the mind. In that moment of disorientation, influence slips in. Think of a chess player who suddenly moves in a way that defies conventional strategy. The opponent freezes, time stretches, calculation falters. That hesitation is where advantage is born. Predictability is comfort. Unpredictability, when controlled, is dominance. The sixth trick is psychological mirroring with a twist. Humans are drawn to reflections of themselves. When you subtly mirror someone's tone, posture, or rhythm of speech, they feel understood. Rapport deepens. Barriers lower. But once connection is established, you gradually shift your demeanor, becoming slightly more assertive, slightly more decisive. Often, they will unconsciously follow your lead. This is not manipulation in the theatrical sense. It is alignment followed by guidance. The mind prefers harmony. When harmony is established, it resists rupture. So when you alter the tempo, they adjust to preserve the bond. Your enemy may believe they are leading the conversation. In truth, they are being led through their own reflection. The seventh trick is perhaps the most ruthless. Master your own fear before attempting to control anyone else's. Fear is contagious. It leaks through tone, posture, pacing. If you are internally unstable, no technique will save you. Your enemy will sense it, even if they cannot articulate it. To outplay someone mentally, you must confront the uncomfortable truths within yourself. Where are you insecure? Where do you crave validation? What insults pierce you? These vulnerabilities are entry points. Seal them not by denial, but by awareness. When you are no longer desperate for approval, flattery loses its hook. When you are no longer terrified of rejection, threats lose their sting. When you are no longer defined by immediate outcomes, pressure loses its leverage. The most dangerous opponent is not the one with the loudest voice or the sharpest intellect. It is the one who has nothing obvious to exploit. Human psychology is not mystical. It is patterned. We seek status. We avoid pain. We fear exclusion. We chase certainty. And in these patterns lie the strings by which minds are moved. To pretend otherwise is naive. To understand it is empowering. To apply it without conscience is ruthless. But here is the paradox. The more you understand these tactics, the more disciplined you must become. Power without discipline collapses into chaos. Strategic thinking without emotional control turns into paranoia. The mind that seeks to outplay others must not become consumed by suspicion. Picture yourself standing in a crowded room. Conversations swirl. Laughter erupts. Alliances form and dissolve in glances. Beneath the surface, calculations unfold. Who holds influence? Who seeks approval? Who fears irrelevance? You observe without urgency. You listen more than you speak. You reveal less than you know. Your words are measured. Your reactions are deliberate. You are not passive. You are studying. When conflict arises, you do not rush to dominate. You ask questions that expose contradictions. You allow others to overextend. You let silence pressure them into revealing more than intended. Silence is uncomfortable. Most people fill it impulsively. In their haste, they betray strategy, and you remain composed. This composure is not arrogance. It is restraint. It is understanding that emotional explosions are gifts to your adversaries. Anger narrows perception. Panic accelerates mistakes. Desperation advertises weakness. There will be moments when provocation tempts you. Insults designed to trigger pride. Challenges crafted to corner your ego. In those moments, remember, the trap is emotional, not logical. Refuse the bait. Step outside the script. Let them reveal their impatience while you conserve your clarity. Mental dominance is rarely about overwhelming force. It is about controlled contrast. When others are reactive, you are deliberate. When others are loud, you are precise. When others seek immediate victory, you think in longer arcs. Time itself becomes your ally. Many enemies defeat themselves through impulsive escalation. They overplay their hand. They expose their alliances prematurely. They reveal ambition without camouflage. If you remain patient, their urgency becomes visible, and once visible, it can be countered. Patience is not inaction. It is preparation. Consider how often people crave recognition. They want their intelligence acknowledged, their authority respected, their presence validated. If you strategically provide subtle acknowledgement, even to rivals, you disarm defensiveness. A measured compliment can lower shields. An unexpected concession can create confusion. But never confuse kindness with surrender. Every gesture should be calibrated. You give just enough to create balance, never enough to create dependency on your approval. To outplay your enemies mentally is not to live in constant war. It is to understand that perception shapes outcomes more than brute effort. It is to accept that people respond to signals, not intentions. It is to refine your signals until they communicate strength, composure, and unpredictability. There will be moments when you are misunderstood, when silence is interpreted as weakness, when restraint is mistaken for fear. Do not rush to correct these misjudgments. Sometimes underestimation is the greatest shield. When others believe you incapable, they lower their guard. And lowered guards invite stir. Strategic positioning. You do not need to crush every opponent publicly. Often, subtle redirection is enough. Shift alliances quietly. Offer alternatives privately. Plant questions instead of accusations. Influence spreads more effectively through suggestion than confrontation. In the end, the most ruthless trick is internal. Detach your ego from the immediate clash. Ego demands victory eventually. The ego wants applause. Strategy wants leverage. The ego reacts. Strategy calculates. If you can silence the ego long enough to see clearly, you begin to operate on a different level. You stop chasing approval. You stop fearing temporary setbacks. You start evaluating interactions like moves in a larger game. And here, in this mental arena, you realize something unsettling and liberating at the same time. Your enemies are human. They are driven by the same impulses you are learning to master. They fear irrelevance. They crave influence. They protect fragile identities. Once you see their fragility, you stop fearing their aggression. Outplaying someone mentally is not about cruelty. It is about clarity. It is about recognizing that the world rewards those who understand human nature as it is, not as they wish it to be. It is about navigating ambition without illusion, conflict without hesitation. The shadows of power are not reserved for tyrants. They exist in boardrooms, classrooms, social circles, families. Anywhere influence is contested, psychology reigns. And now the question returns, sharper than before. If the battlefield is the mind, and the weapons are perception, restraint, unpredictability, and self-mastery, will you continue fighting with noise and impulse, or will you learn to move like a shadow, unseen but decisive, calm but unyielding, present yet unreadable? The choice is not moral, it is strategic. You begin to notice something unsettling once you stop reacting and start observing. Most conflicts are not about truth, they are about positioning. They are not about who is right, but about who appears unshakable. And the moment you grasp this, the terrain shifts beneath your feet. Imagine walking into a space where tension already lingers in the air. A boardroom, a social circle, a quiet family gathering where old rivalries breathe beneath polite smiles. Words are exchanged, but beneath the words are currents, status tests, subtle provocations, invitations to overreact. Most people step into these arenas unaware they are being measured. They speak too quickly. They reveal preferences too eagerly. They defend themselves before being attacked. But you are learning to see the invisible choreography. There is a psychological phenomenon that governs much of human interaction. People project their internal insecurities outward and then respond to their own projection. They accuse others of arrogance because they feel inferior. They question loyalty because they fear abandonment. They challenge authority because they crave recognition. If you understand this, you realize that your enemy's aggression often has very little to do with you. And that realization is power. The next ruthless principle unfolds from this truth. Never confront insecurity directly, redirect it. When someone challenges you publicly, your instinct may be to counterattack, to dismantle them with facts, to assert dominance through force of intellect. But direct confrontation feeds their emotional hunger. It validates the drama they crave. Instead, subtly elevate them. Acknowledge their perspective without surrendering yours. When they feel seen, their hostility softens. You remove the emotional fuel from their fire, and in doing so, you retain control of the interaction. This is not kindness. It is state. Strategy. In Renaissance courts, where political alliances shifted like smoke and betrayal could cost a life, understanding perception was survival. Niccolo Machiavelli observed that rulers who relied solely on force were feared but unstable. Those who relied solely on love were adored but vulnerable. The art lay in balance, projecting enough strength to discourage rebellion, enough approachability to discourage conspiracy. You must do the same in your psychological battles. There is a particular kind of enemy who does not attack openly. They smile, they agree, they support you in public, and in private, they plant seeds of doubt. These are the most dangerous opponents because they operate through ambiguity. Confront them aggressively, and you appear paranoid. Ignore them completely, and their influence spreads. The counter is not exposure, it is illumination. Instead of accusing, increase transparency, clarify intentions publicly, reinforce alliances visibly. When you make your actions clear and consistent, you shrink the space in which whispers thrive. Deception requires shadows. If you flood the room with calm, controlled clarity, the manipulator is forced into the light, and in the light, manipulation looks petty. Another truth you must internalize. People fear social exclusion more than logical defeat. You can win an argument and still lose influence if the other person feels humiliated. Humiliation breeds revenge, and revenge is patient, so when you outplay someone, do it without spectacle. Let them save face. Let them retreat without public damage. A cornered enemy becomes creative. An enemy who believes they exited gracefully often abandons pursuit. This is the psychology of controlled victory. You will encounter moments when your opponent attempts to provoke you into revealing your long-term intentions. They will ask leading questions. They will test boundaries. They will try to map your strategy by analyzing your reactions. Most people answer reflexively, seeking to appear transparent and honest. But transparency without calculation is vulnerability. Answer in layers. Provide enough truth to satisfy curiosity, but never enough to expose your endgame. Ambiguity is not deception. It is protection. When others cannot fully predict your next move, they hesitate, and hesitation is the crack through which influence enters. There is also the weaponization of time. Impulsive individuals crave immediate resolution. They want closure, decisions, reactions. If you deliberately slow the tempo, you force them to confront their impatience. The longer a decision lingers, the more anxious the impulsive become. In that anxiety, they reveal priorities, fears, leverage points. Patience, when intentional, becomes psychological pressure. Consider how often people assume silence equals weakness. They interpret restraint as lack of confidence. Use this misjudgment. Allow them to underestimate you. Allow them to believe you are less aware than you are. Underestimation is camouflage. When they finally realize you have been calculating all along, it is too late to recalibrate. There is a darker layer to this mental game. Controlling emotional contagion. Emotions spread through groups like invisible currents. One anxious person can destabilize an entire team. One confident individual can stabilize chaos. If you regulate your emotional expression deliberately, you influence the emotional climate around you. Walk into tension with steady breath, measured speech, relaxed posture. People unconsciously mirror composure. They begin to settle, and in settling, they look to you as the anchor. Influence grows not from dominance, but from emotional gravity. But beware, composure must be genuine. Forced calm feels artificial. It signals science, not mastery. The mind of your opponent will sense incongruence. To truly radiate stability, you must cultivate it internally. This requires confronting your own fears, not masking them. The ruthless truth is that the more secure you become within yourself, the less manipulable you are. And the less manipulable you are, the more intimidating you become. Another strategy emerges from understanding human pride. Pride is fragile. It can be inflated or punctured with precision. If you wish to disarm an adversary temporarily, appeal to their pride. Ask for their insight. Frame a suggestion as building upon their idea. When someone believes they are partially responsible for a solution, they defend it, even if it ultimately serves your agenda. You have not forced them. You have involved them. Yet involvement must be controlled. Give too much credit, and you empower them beyond your design. Give too little, and resentment grows. The art lies in calibration, offering just enough acknowledgement to secure alignment, never enough to surrender influence. You will also face enemies who attempt to dominate through intimidation, raising their voice, expanding their physical presence, leveraging status. These displays are often compensatory. True confidence rarely needs theatrics. When confronted with such tactics, reduce your movements, slow your speech, lower your tone slightly. Speak with clarity. When you refuse to escalate, their performance feels exaggerated. Observers sense the imbalance. Quiet strength exposes loud insecurity. In social dynamics, reputation precedes reality. If people believe you are decisive, they interpret your pauses as strategic. If they believe you are weak, they interpret your pauses as hesitation. Therefore, shape your reputation intentionally. Early impressions matter disproportionately. Demonstrate competence and composure early in any new environment. Those impressions will shield you later. Perception compounds over time. There is also the strategic use of selective vulnerability. Complete opacity can create distance. If you never reveal anything personal, others may distrust you, but reveal too much, and you provide ammunition. The solution is intentional disclosure. Share controlled narratives that humanize you without exposing critical weaknesses. When people see you as both competent and relatable, they lower defenses. And lowered defenses create influence. Conflict will sometimes be unavoidable. In those moments, choose your battleground carefully. Public confrontations amplify ego. Private conversations allow recalibration. If you must challenge someone, do so in an environment that minimizes their need to perform. Remove their audience, and you remove half their aggression. The mind performs differently when it is not being watched. There is an uncomfortable realization waiting beneath all these tactics. Morality and strategy do not always align. You may feel tension between authenticity and calculation, but understand this: strategy does not require cruelty. It requires awareness. It requires refusing to be naive about the motivations of others. To move through the world without understanding power dynamics is to walk through a forest blindfolded. You may survive, but you will be reacting, not directing. The deeper you step into psychological strategy, the more you see patterns repeating everywhere. Leaders who fall often do so not because they lack intelligence, but because they misread perception. They assume loyalty where there is only convenience. They assume admiration means respect. Admiration can turn to envy in a breath. Respect, however, endures longer. And respect is built on consistent strength, controlled emotion, and fair but firm boundaries. Boundaries are critical. If you allow small violations to pass repeatedly, you train others to escalate. Address minor transgressions calmly but clearly. A subtle correction early prevents a dramatic confrontation later. This is not aggression, it is maintenance of structure. Structure creates predictability. Predictability creates psychological safety. And safety creates loyalty. But never confuse loyalty with permanence. Circumstances change, interests shift, even trusted allies recalibrate when incentives evolve. Therefore, maintain awareness without paranoia. Trust, but observe. Align, but verify. Your enemies will attempt to map your weaknesses. Do the same, but silently. What do they react strongly to? Where do they become defensive? Which topics cause hesitation? These are indicators of insecurity or hidden agenda. Store this information not to exploit maliciously, but to navigate effectively. Information is leverage. But leverage should be used sparingly. Overuse exposes intent. There is a subtle difference between intimidation and inevitability. Intimidation relies on fear of consequence. Inevitability relies on perception of unstoppable momentum. If you consistently follow through on commitments, if your decisions align with your words, if your actions reflect clarity, people begin to see you as inevitable. They adjust accordingly. When opponents perceive you as inevitable, resistance feels futile. In moments of high tension, breathe deliberately before responding. That pause does more than calm you, it signals control. Most people rush to speak. The one who waits appears thoughtful, measured, unshaken. These micro-signals accumulate into macro influence. Never forget, the goal is not to dominate every interaction. It is to shape the psychological landscape so that opposition becomes inefficient. Sometimes the most powerful move is strategic concession. Yielding a minor point can create an illusion of flexibility while preserving your core objective. When others believe they have won something, they relax. And in relaxation, they overlook the larger framework still controlled by you. This is not deceit. It is prioritization. The mind of your enemy is rarely singular. It is layered with competing desires, status, security, validation, belonging. If you can align your objective with one of their desires, resistance diminishes. The art lies in framing present outcomes as mutually beneficial even when the deeper structure favors you. Humans prefer cooperation to confrontation, provided their ego remains intact. As you internalize these principles, something shifts inside you. You begin to feel less reactive, less threatened. You see provocations as data, not attacks. You recognize hostility as insecurity in disguise. You understand that mental dominance is less about overpowering and more about outlasting. And perhaps the most dangerous transformation is this: you stop fearing conflict, not because you crave it, but because you understand it. You realize that enemies are not mythical forces of destruction. They are humans navigating their own fears and ambitions. When you master your internal landscape, their turbulence cannot easily penetrate yours. This is where the real advantage lies, not in cruelty, not in manipulation for its own sake, but in disciplined perception, in seeing clearly while others are clouded by ego, in remaining steady while others spiral. And as the psychological game deepens, you begin to understand that outplaying your enemies mentally is not a single act. It is a posture, a way of moving through the world with deliberate awareness, a refusal to be easily read, easily provoked, easily cornered. The shadows are no longer intimidated. They are familiar, and in that familiarity, your power grows quieter and far more dangerous. There comes a moment in every silent war when you realize the contest is no longer about who is stronger, but about who can endure psychological pressure without fracturing. Strength impresses, endurance destabilizes, and the mind that does not fracture becomes the mind that dictates. You must understand something uncomfortable. Most people collapse internally long before they lose externally. They surrender confidence before circumstances demand it. They imagine defeat before it materializes. And once imagination turns against them, reality follows. If you wish to outplay your enemies mentally, you must learn to weaponize perception of momentum. Momentum is not always real. It is often a story people tell themselves about the direction of events. When someone believes they are losing, their decision-making deteriorates. They hesitate, they second-guess, they overcompensate. Conversely, when someone believes they are winning, they grow bold, sometimes recklessly so. Your task is not merely to gain advantage, it is to influence how advantage is perceived. In political courts centuries ago, survival depended less on brute power and more on reading subtle shifts in favor. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that a ruler could appear secure even when threatened, provided he projected continuity. Panic spreads faster than truth. If the leader trembles, the structure shakes. If the leader remains composed, even instability appears temporary. You must embody this principle in your own arenas. When setbacks occur, and they will, do not react publicly with urgency. Address them with measured language. Frame them as adjustments rather than defeats. The mind of your opponent watches for cracks. Deny them visible fractures. There is a ruthless psychology behind this. Humans mirror perceived trajectory. If you behave as though you are steadily advancing, many will unconsciously align with that trajectory. If you behave as though you are scrambling, others prepare to abandon you. This is why composure during adversity is not just noble, it is strategic. But there is another layer. Sometimes you must allow your enemy to feel false momentum. Encourage overconfidence. If a rival believes they have cornered you, they may accelerate prematurely. They may expose alliances too soon. They may reveal tactics in their eagerness to finish you. Pride has a tempo, and that tempo is often too fast. Strategic restraint creates space for opponents to overextend, and once they overextend, their vulnerability is no longer hidden. Picture a hunter who deliberately rustles the bushes to make prey believe escape is possible in a certain direction. The prey runs into a trap. In psychological warfare, the trap is not physical, it is informational. You allow your enemy to commit to a narrative that benefits you. The key is patience. Patience is intolerable for the impulsive. It is unbearable for the insecure. They need resolution. They crave confirmation. They want immediate proof that they are winning. If you withhold reaction, you starve them of that proof. Uncertainty creeps in. Doubt corrodes certainty from within. Doubt is the silent assassin of confidence. Another ruthless truth: people often project their own tactics onto others. A manipulative person assumes you are manipulating. A deceitful person assumes you are deceiving. Use this projection carefully. If you remain transparent in areas that do not threaten you, you amplify their paranoia. They begin to suspect hidden layers where none exist. Suspicion drains energy. When your enemy wastes cognitive resources trying to decode non-existent flow. They weaken themselves. Meanwhile, you conserve focus, yet you must guard against becoming consumed by the same paranoia. Strategic thinking is sharpest when calm. If you begin to see enemies in every shadow, you erode your own clarity. The discipline lies in observing without obsession. Now consider the power of contrast. If someone attempts to paint you as volatile, respond with calm. If they attempt to label you as weak, demonstrate consistency. The human brain relies heavily on pattern recognition. When your behavior consistently contradicts negative framing, observers experience cognitive dissonance. Eventually, the false narrative collapses under the weight of inconsistency. Consistency is a weapon few appreciate because it lacks drama, but drama burns out. Consistency compounds. There is also the art of strategic unpredictability, not chaos, but calculated variation. If you are entirely predictable, you are easily mapped. If you are entirely erratic, you are dismissed. The balance lies in being consistent in principles but flexible in execution. Your principles become your anchor. Your tactics remain fluid. This fluidity creates tension in the mind of your opponent. They cannot rely on past patterns to forecast your response. They must constantly reassess. Reassessment consumes mental energy. The more energy they expend analyzing you, the less they have to advance themselves. Energy is finite. Force them to spend it inefficiently. You will encounter individuals who attempt to bait you into public emotional displays. They may question your competence, mock your decisions, or subtly challenge your authority in front of others. Their objective is simple: destabilize you. If you react emotionally, they succeed regardless of the content of your argument. The audience will remember the heat, not the logic. Instead, respond with measured inquiry. Ask the M to clarify. Encourage them to elaborate. Often, those who attempt to provoke rely on surface-level assertions. When pressed calmly for depth, their arguments unravel. Let them speak longer than they planned. Silence after their words can be more destabilizing than immediate rebuttal. Silence creates psychological discomfort. Most people rush to fill it, often revealing insecurity in the process. There is also strategic empathy, a concept often misunderstood. Empathy does not mean surrendering boundaries. It means understanding the emotional drivers behind behavior. If you can identify what your opponent fears losing, status, relevance, control, you can address that fear indirectly. When fear subsides, hostility softens. Sometimes the most ruthless move is not to crush opposition, but to convert it. Offer a path for alignment. Provide incentives that make collaboration more attractive than conflict. Many enemies are not ideologically opposed to you. They are protecting their own interests. Align interests, and you dissolve resistance. But never forget, alignment must not compromise your foundation. Concessions that erode your core objective weaken you long-term. The art lies in distinguishing between peripheral flexibility and structural integrity. Human beings are acutely sensitive to fairness, at least in perception. If your actions appear arbitrarily harsh, even neutral observers may turn against you. Therefore, when you enforce boundaries, do so transparently. Make the rationale visible. This reduces the chance of resentment metastasizing into organized opposition. Perceived injustice unites rivals. There is another subtle strategy: control the rhythm of disclosure. Information, when revealed gradually, maintains intrigue. If you unveil everything at once, you eliminate suspense and reduce leverage. Controlled revelation keeps others attentive. They remain curious, engaged, slightly uncertain. Curiosity can be harnessed. In negotiation, never present your final position immediately. Let the conversation breathe. Allow incremental shifts. Each small adjustment creates the illusion of progress, even if the destination was predetermined in your mind. Progress feels collaborative. Predetermination feels oppressive. Now confront a deeper psychological reality. Many conflicts are fueled not by objective threats, but by ego collisions. Two individuals competing for validation. Two leaders unwilling to yield symbolic ground. If you can detach your ego from the symbolic layer, you gain freedom. Ask yourself in heated moments, is this about outcome or about pride? If it is pride, consider whether the cost of defending it exceeds the benefit. Strategic surrender of minor ego battles can secure major victories. Ego demands applause. Strategy demands results. There will be times when your enemy attempts to isolate you, socially, professionally, politically. Isolation weakens perceived legitimacy. The counter is not desperation for inclusion. It is quiet reinforcement of alternative alliances. Diversify your connections before you need them. Build relationships when stakes are low. When isolation attempts arise, you are already supported. Security built in advance is more stable than alliances formed in panic. Observe also how people respond to ambiguity. Some thrive in it, most do not. When circumstances are unclear, the one who articulates a coherent interpretation gains influence. Even if events are complex, frame them simply. Clarity reduces anxiety. The person who reduces anxiety becomes a focal point. But ensure your framing aligns with reality. Overstated confidence that later collapses destroys credibility. Credibility is cumulative. Each fulfilled promise reinforces it. Each broken word erodes it disproportionately. In psychological battles, credibility is armor. Let us descend further into the darker layer of strategy, selective confrontation. Not every insult deserves response. Not every slight requires correction. If you respond to every provocation, you signal fragility. Choose your confrontations deliberately. When you finally address an issue, others will sense that it matters. Scarcity applies to conflict as well. If confrontation becomes rare and precise, its impact multiplies. Another ruthless maneuver involves reframing criticism as collaboration. When someone criticizes you, publicly thank them for their perspective. Extract any useful element and build upon it. This does two things. It neutralizes hostility and positions you as above pettiness. Observers gravitate toward maturity. The critic is left with a dilemma: escalate further and appear unreasonable, or withdraw and accept your reframing. In many cases, they retreat. Understand this clearly. Mental dominance is not about suppressing others. It is about shaping interactions so that escalation becomes inefficient for them. Efficiency in conflict favors the disciplined. Maintaining composure, patience, strategic awareness. It is exhausting. Your enemies rely on this exhaustion. They hope you will slip, that you will speak impulsively, that you will lash out. Rest strategically. Withdraw when necessary. Preserve mental clarity. A fatigued strategist becomes predictable. And predictability, once again, invites exploitation. As your mastery grows, you may feel temptation to overplay psychological tactics, to manipulate unnecessarily. Resist this. Excessive manipulation erodes authenticity. People sense artificiality over time. True influence blends strategy with genuine presence. You are not performing a role. You are refining awareness. The deeper truth beneath all ruthless psychology tricks is this: power is relational. It exists in the space between perceptions. If you can manage that space calmly, deliberately, you shift outcomes without visible force. Your enemies may never fully understand why their attacks fail to land, why their provocations dissolve, why their confidence wavers in your presence. They will search for tangible explanations, connections, luck, circumstance. You mastered yourself first, and in mastering yourself, you became the most difficult opponent they could ever face. There is a deeper layer to mental warfare that few dare to explore because it requires confronting an uncomfortable reality. Influence is sustained not by brilliance alone, but by emotional architecture. If you wish to outplay your enemies mentally, You must learn how to design the emotional climate in which they operate. Most people think in terms of moments. An argument is a moment. A rivalry is a pattern. A reputation is an environment. And environments shape behavior far more powerfully than isolated events. When you understand this, you stop obsessing over winning single exchanges. You begin shaping the atmosphere in which all exchanges occur. Niccolo Machiavelli understood that rulers who relied only on occasional displays of power eventually faced rebellion. But those who structured their states carefully, balancing fear and favor, order and flexibility, created systems where opposition struggled to organize. The system itself discouraged revolt. Your psychological system must do the same. First, control emotional temperature. Every group, every dynamic has a baseline level of tension. If tension runs high, people become reactive, suspicious. If tension is too low, complacency spreads and respect diminishes. Your presence should subtly regulate this temperature. When discussions grow heated, you lower the intensity with measured speech. When complacency breeds disrespect, you introduce firmness. The key is calibration. Extremes destabilize. Balance commands. Enemies often attempt to manipulate emotional temperature to their advantage. They may escalate tension to force impulsive decisions, or they may create artificial calm to conceal strategic moves. If you can perceive these shifts early, you can counterbalance them. Perception is everything. Now consider another ruthless dimension: psychological scarcity. Scarcity amplifies value. When your attention, approval, or availability becomes slightly limited, people instinctively assign it greater importance. This does not mean withdrawal from all engagement. It means avoiding constant accessibility. When you are always present, always responding, always explaining, you dilute your weight. When you respond selectively and deliberately, each word carries gravity. Enemies accustomed to immediate access will feel destabilized by your restraint. They will wonder whether they have lost favor or leverage. Uncertainty nudges them into cautious behavior. But scarcity must never appear petty. It must appear natural, rooted in purpose. If it feels performative, it loses potency. There is also the psychology of anticipation. Anticipation heightens emotional investment. If you reveal outcomes too early, you eliminate suspense. If you communicate that decisions are forthcoming, that movements are underway, you create a state of alertness in others. Alertness consumes mental bandwidth. When your rivals remain in a state of anticipation, they devote energy to predicting your actions rather than executing their own. In that redistribution of attention, you gain advantage. Another strategic layer involves reframing conflict as evolution. Instead of reacting defensively when challenged, present challenges as opportunities for refinement. This narrative does two things. It portrays you as adaptable, and it casts aggressors as contributors to your growth rather than threats. It is psychologically disarming. People expect defensiveness. When they encounter composure and openness, they recalibrate. Their aggressive energy loses traction. But beneath this openness, you must maintain internal steel. Adaptation does not mean surrendering core objectives. It means adjusting tactics while preserving trajectory. Now descend into something more. Ruthless. Control of emotional reward. Human beings are conditioned by reinforcement. Praise, acknowledgement, inclusion. These are emotional rewards. Creates discomfort. If someone consistently supports constructive outcomes, reward them subtly. If someone disrupts stability, reduce reinforcement. Do not announce punishment. Do not dramatize disapproval. Simply adjust emotional investment. Over time, people gravitate toward behaviors that maintain reward and avoid behaviors that result in subtle exclusion. This is not cruelty. It is conditioning. Be cautious, however. Overuse of withdrawal can breed resentment. Reinforcement must be proportionate and fair in appearance. Perceived arbitrariness erodes trust. Your enemies may attempt the inverse, publicly withholding acknowledgement to diminish your influence. When this happens, do not chase validation. Continue delivering consistent performance. Others will notice patterns. Silence from a rival often exposes insecurity more than it diminishes you. Consistency again becomes your shield. Let us examine intimidation at a deeper psychological level. True intimidation is not loud. It is inevitable. When people believe that your responses are predictable in principle but unstoppable in execution, they hesitate before crossing you. Inevitability is built through follow-through. If you establish a boundary and enforce it calmly every time it is crossed, you cultivate inevitability. There is no drama, no explosion, only certainty. Over time, others internalize this certainty. They adjust their behavior preemptively. But if your enforcement is inconsistent, sometimes firm, sometimes passive, uncertainty invites testing. Enemies probe where structure appears weak. You must also understand projection of future. People evaluate leaders and rivals based on perceived trajectory. If they believe your influence is expanding, they align early. If they believe you are declining, they distance quietly. Therefore, communicate momentum strategically. Share progress selectively. Highlight forward movement without arrogance. Momentum is contagious when presented with quiet confidence. Now consider the role of mystery. Complete transparency eliminates intrigue. Complete secrecy breeds suspicion. Between these extremes lies controlled opacity. Share enough to establish trust. Withhold enough to maintain curiosity. Curiosity creates engagement. When your opponents cannot fully decode you, they remain alert. But when they sense coherence beneath the mystery, they respect it. Randomness breeds dismissal. Structured unpredictability breeds caution. There is also the psychology of framing failure. You will fail. Every strategist does. The difference lies in interpretation. If failure is framed as collapse, confidence erodes. If failure is framed as data, momentum persists. Speak about setbacks in language of learning and recalibration. Internally, extract precise lessons. Externally, project stability. Your enemies often rely on emotional exaggeration. They amplify minor missteps into catastrophic narratives. Do not participate in that exaggeration. Calm diminishes drama. Now we approach something more delicate, the use of controlled vulnerability to deepen loyalty. Occasional admission of limitation humanizes you. It signals authenticity, but the vulnerability must be deliberate and contained. Reveal challenges you are actively addressing, not insecurities that undermine perception of competence. When people see both strength and humility, they experience cognitive harmony. Extremes of invulnerability appear arrogant. Extremes of fragility appear unstable. Balance again becomes your silent ally. Let us step into the darker territory of psychological endurance. Some enemies will not retreat easily. They will persist, testing, probing, attempting to erode your resolve through repeated friction. Their strategy is attrition. They hope you will tire before they do. This is where inner architecture matters most. If your sense of identity depends on constant approval, attrition will break you. If your confidence depends on uninterrupted success, setbacks will destabilize you. But if your identity rests on disciplined self-awareness, external turbulence cannot easily penetrate. Your greatest shield is not aggression. It is self-definition. Define yourself by principles, not by praise. Anchor your worth internally. When your validation does not depend on your enemy's acknowledgement, you remove their leverage. They cannot manipulate what they cannot threaten. There is also strategic timing in confrontation. Strike when attention is focused and stakes are clear. Avoid escalating when emotions are volatile and context is chaotic. The mind absorbs information differently depending on environment. Choose moments where clarity favors you. Timing transforms identical words into vastly different outcomes. You must also learn to differentiate between true enemies and temporary adversaries. Not everyone who opposes you seeks your destruction. Some simply seek negotiation. If you treat every challenger as an existential threat, you create unnecessary hostility. Discernment preserves energy. Reserve ruthless tactics for genuine threats. For others, maintain openness to recalibration. Another powerful maneuver is reframing control as collaboration. When you guide decisions subtly, phrase them as collective reasoning. People resist overt control but accept shared logic. Present outcomes as emerging from dialogue rather than imposition. Ownership increases compliance. If individuals feel they participated in shaping a decision, defend it, even if your influence structured it from the beginning. Yet you must guard against internal corruption. Mastery of psychological influence can intoxicate. You may begin to see every interaction as a game. This mindset erodes authenticity and breeds isolation. Remember, strategy is a tool, not an identity. The objective is not to manipulate endlessly, but to navigate wisely. Ruthlessness lies in clarity, not cruelty. As you continue refining these mental maneuvers, your presence changes. You speak less impulsively, you listen more strategically, you react less predictably. Others sense it before they understand it. They feel measured. In high-stakes moments when tension spikes and eyes turn toward you, you do not rush. You allow silence to settle. You choose words like instruments, precise, deliberate. Your calmness unsettles the impatient. Your restraint frustrates the reckless. And gradually, something profound occurs. Your enemies begin adjusting their strategies around you. They become cautious in your presence. They rehearse their words before speaking. They anticipate resistance where previously they assumed compliance. You have shifted the psychological terrain. Outplaying your enemies mentally is not about a single trick. It is about constructing an ecosystem of perception where impulsive aggression falters, where insecurity reveals itself, where composure outlasts volatility. And in this ecosystem, you are no longer reacting to storms. You are directing the weather. There is a stage in every psychological conflict where the surface battle fades and something more intricate begins. The contest for identity. Not identity as a label, but identity as perceived authority. When two forces oppose one another long enough, the struggle ceases to be about isolated moves and becomes a question: who defines reality in this space? The one who defines reality governs behavior. Most people do not realize how easily their sense of reality can be shaped. They believe they are independent thinkers, immune to subtle influence, yet their interpretations are constantly guided by tone, framing, repetition, and perceived consensus. If you can shape interpretation, you do not need to control outcomes directly. Outcomes will bend toward the interpretation you've installed. This is where mental warfare reaches its most refined form. Machiavelli understood that power was rarely about brute domination alone. It was about narrative authority, a ruler who could frame events as necessary, strategic, inevitable, even when harsh, retained legitimacy. A ruler who allowed opponents to frame events as chaotic or unjust lost control, even if he retained formal power. You must internalize this principle. Whoever frames the story shapes the battlefield. When conflict arises, do not argue only facts. Frame meaning. If a rival questions your decision, present that decision as part of a larger trajectory. Context dilutes criticism. Isolated actions are easy to attack. Integrated strategies are harder to dismantle. Humans search for coherence. Provide it. Now step deeper into something darker: psychological exhaustion. Some enemies will attempt to exhaust you mentally. They will raise endless objections. They will nitpick. They will shift goalposts. Their objective is not victory through logic. It is erosion through fatigue. If you chase every objection, you lose. Instead, identify patterns. When you detect repetitive tactics, address the pattern rather than each instance. Calmly articulate the behavior itself. Once exposed, repetition loses subtlety, and when subtlety vanishes, effectiveness diminishes. But never do this with visible frustration. Frustration signals that their strategy is working. Another dimension of ruthless psychology lies in selective amplification. Not every challenge deserves equal weight. If you treat minor resistance as significant, you elevate it. If you respond proportionally, or even minimally, you signal confidence. Attention is a currency. Spend it wisely. When a minor adversary attempts provocation, sometimes the most devastating response is indifference, not theatrical dismissal. Genuine non-engagement. The absence of acknowledgement deprives them of the significance they seek. Insignificance is unbearable for those driven by ego. But this tactic requires emotional discipline. You must truly detach from the need to win every micro-battle. Otherwise, your indifference will feel forced. Now consider the psychology of inevitability at a more advanced level. Earlier, inevitability was built through consistent boundary enforcement. Here, it evolves into perceived trajectory dominance. When people believe you are ascending, growing in influence, competence, network, they instinctively adjust behavior to align with that ascent. Demonstrate growth subtly, improve skills visibly, expand alliances quietly, let results accumulate. You do not need to announce expansion. Evidence speaks. Momentum that is seen, but not loudly declared, feels authentic. Your enemies may attempt to counter by manufacturing doubt. They may question sustainability. They may predict collapse, resist the temptation to defend aggressively. continue producing results. Doubt fades when contradicted repeatedly. Consistency crushes skepticism over time. Let us now explore psychological inversion. When someone accuses you of control, respond with empowerment. When they claim you dominate decisions, highlight shared input. Invert their accusation calmly. This forces them to reconcile their narrative with observable behavior. Accusations lose power when reality contradicts them consistently. However, inversion must be genuine. Manufactured gestures will eventually expose themselves. There is also the art of calibrated confrontation escalation. Not all opposition warrants maximum force. Escalate proportionally. Begin with subtle correction. If resistance persists, increase firmness. By escalating gradually, you appear reasonable. Observers perceive you as patient rather than aggressive, and if escalation becomes necessary, it feels justified. Justification protects reputation. Reputation, once fractured, is difficult to repair. Therefore, always consider optics, not in a superficial sense, but in the sense of psychological interpretation. Ask yourself, how will neutral observers interpret this action? Because influence rarely exists in isolation. It exists within a network of perceptions. You must manage that network deliberately. Now descend into the most internal layer of ruthless mastery, detachment from immediate emotional reward. Many leaders and rivals alike crave visible victory. They want applause. They want acknowledgement that they have won. This craving leads to overextension. They press too hard. They humiliate opponents unnecessarily. They gloat. And in doing so, they plant seeds of future resistance. If you win, win quietly. Leave room for others to preserve dignity. Humiliated enemies become patient architects of revenge. Respected adversaries often choose coexistence. This is not mercy. It is long-term stability. You will encounter moments when direct aggression appears tempting, when crushing opposition swiftly seems efficient. Sometimes decisive action is necessary. But even decisive action must be controlled. Act with clarity, not with rage. Rage clouds precision. Precision maintains dominance. Let us explore social proof. People look to others to determine what is acceptable, credible, or powerful. If you can cultivate visible ally, see, individuals who respect you publicly, you amplify perceived legitimacy. Legitimacy deters attack. Enemies hesitate when they perceive collective support around you. But alliances must be authentic. Fabricated support collapses under scrutiny. Invest in relationships before conflict arises. Loyalty built during peace is stronger during tension. There is also the psychological advantage of layered competence. If your enemy believes you excel in only one domain, they attack that domain. If they perceive multidimensional capability, intellectual, emotional, strategic, they hesitate. Expand your skills quietly. Become difficult to categorize. Uncertainty about your limits amplifies caution. And then comes the ruthless mastery of self-narrative. How do you speak about yourself internally? If your internal narrative is fragile, if you secretly doubt your capability, your micro-signals will betray you. Confidence is not loud affirmation. It is silent conviction. Rewrite your internal narrative through evidence. Track your victories. Acknowledge growth. Strengthen your internal architecture deliberately. When your internal narrative stabilizes, external attacks lose penetration power. Now consider the psychology of tension release. If you maintain constant pressure in every interaction, fatigue spreads to you and to others. Pressure must be cyclical, alternate intensity with relief. Provide moments of collaboration, humor, shared success. Relief increases loyalty. Constant strain breeds rebellion. Even in ruthless strategy, rhythm matters. You must also recognize when to disengage entirely. Some conflicts are unproductive. Some enemies thrive on chaos. If engagement drains more energy than the objective warrants, withdraw strategically. Not as surrender, but as recalibration. Redirect resources toward growth rather than endless defense. Your objective is not to defeat every opponent. It is to build a position so stable that opposition becomes peripheral. As this stage unfolds, something profound changes within you. You stop fearing confrontation. You stop craving validation. You stop reacting impulsively to provocation. Instead, you evaluate, you measure, you respond deliberately. Your enemies may attempt one final tactic, character assault. When direct challenges fail, they may attempt to erode your image subtly. They may question your motives. They may insinuate hidden agendas. Respond not with outrage, but with transparent consistency. Live in such alignment with your stated principles that accusations feel hollow. Time is your ally here. Truth demonstrated repeatedly outlasts rumor, and perhaps the most ruthless transformation of all occurs quietly inside you. You no longer see enemies as monsters. You see them as predictable patterns of fear, ambition, and insecurity. Their strategies become readable. Their provocations become transparent. When you understand the mechanism, the machine loses mystique. You realize that mental dominance is not a theatrical display. It is the quiet accumulation of discipline, perception, restraint, and calibrated action. You are no longer trying to outshout opposition. You are outlasting it. And as you continue ascending, calm, measured, strategically aware, your presence itself becomes psychological leverage. Your enemies sense it before they can articulate it. They feel the weight of someone who cannot be easily shaken. And in that realization, many of them begin to retreat long before you ever need to strike. There is a final threshold in every psychological war, and it is not crossed through aggression, nor through intimidation, nor even through brilliance. It is crossed when you realize that the ultimate battlefield was never your enemy's mind, it was yours. All the strategies, all the calibrated silences, the controlled revelations, the disciplined restraint, the management of perception and momentum, none of it matters if your inner architecture trembles at the first sign of pressure. The world tests you not because it hates you, but because instability is always probed. Every structure is tested for weakness. Every leader is measured for cracks. And so the final ruthless truth emerges: you do not outplay your enemies by obsessing over them. You outplay them by becoming internally unassailable. Niccolo Machiavelli understood something few were willing to admit. Openly, fortune is volatile. Circumstances shift. Alliances fracture. The public mood changes like wind across open water. If you attach your sense of control to external stability, you will always be at the mercy of chaos. But if you root yourself in disciplined awareness, adaptability, and emotional command, chaos becomes terrain, not threat. The final psychology trick is the most dangerous, because it eliminates dependency on tricks altogether. It is strategic detachment. Detachment does not mean apathy. It means refusing to let ego dictate reaction. It means refusing to let praise inflate you or criticism poison you. It means observing your own impulses with the same sharpness you once reserved for your rivals. When someone attempts to provoke you, there is a flicker inside, a surge of heat, a tightening in the chest, a desire to respond immediately. In that flicker lies the old version of you, the reactive version, the predictable version. Pause. In that pause, you reclaim authorship. Most people never develop the muscle of pause. They live in stimulus and response. They are programmable, and because they are programmable, they are controllable. You are no longer programmable. Your enemies may try to bait your pride. They may attempt to corner your reputation. They may test your patience repeatedly, hoping fatigue will erode your composure. They may escalate drama, hoping you will match their intensity. You do not match intensity. You absorb it. You redirect it. You let it exhaust itself against your steadiness. There is a psychological phenomenon that occurs when aggression meets immovable calm. The aggressor begins to doubt the effectiveness of their force. Doubt weakens conviction, and when conviction weakens, strategy falters. Your stillness becomes a mirror in which they confront their own volatility. But understand this: stillness must be chosen daily. It is not a one-time achievement. Discipline is repetitive. Mastery is repetitive. Every interaction is a choice between reaction and strategy. You must choose strategy relentlessly. At this level, your perception sharpens beyond individual conflicts. You begin to see patterns in ambition, in insecurity, in power dynamics. You see how groups shift when leadership appears uncertain. You see how egos spread when clarity is absent. You see how egos collide when validation is scarce. And you stop taking any of it personally. Nothing unsettles an enemy more than a person who cannot be emotionally cornered. They may accuse you of coldness. They may label you distant. They may attempt to reframe your composure as arrogance. Let them. Labels are attempts to control perception. But perception, once again, is shaped through consistency. Continue behaving with measured strength. Continue enforcing boundaries without hostility. Continue rewarding alignment and withdrawing from chaos. Over time, your pattern becomes undeniable. And here is where something extraordinary happens. The psychological war begins to dissolve, not because conflict disappears, but because you are no longer easily drawn into it. You choose when to engage. You choose when to withdraw. You choose when to escalate. You choose when to remain silent. Choice is power. When you realize you are choosing rather than reacting, you have already won more battles than you can count. Your enemies may still exist. Competition will never vanish. But the dynamic has changed. They no longer dictate the rhythm of your emotions. They no longer control your tempo. They no longer determine your confidence. You have reversed the polarity. Instead of asking, "How do I defeat them?" you begin asking, "How do I refine myself?" Refinement is relentless. Sharpen your mind. Strengthen your discipline. Expand your competence. Cultivate alliances built on respect rather than convenience. Deepen your understanding of human nature, not to exploit blindly, but to navigate wisely. The world is not gentle. It never has been. Ambition invites resistance. Visibility invites scrutiny. Power invites challenge. So do not wish for fewer enemies. Wish for greater mastery. Understand this final truth clearly. Enemies are teachers disguised as threats. They expose your impatience. They reveal your insecurities. They test your consistency. Without them, you might remain complacent. But when you learn to extract lessons rather than resentment, opposition becomes refinement. You no longer fear being outplayed because you are not playing a short game. You are building psychological endurance that compounds over years. You are constructing a reputation of steadiness that outlasts rumor. You are embodying inevitability not through intimidation, but through disciplined presence. Imagine walking into any room, corporate, social, political, and carrying with you an invisible gravity. Conversations adjust subtly. Provocations soften before fully forming. Challenges are measured more carefully, not because you threaten, but because you are stable. Stability in a volatile world is rare, and rarity commands respect. You have learned to control narrative without shouting, to project strength without arrogance, to wield silence without insecurity, to confront without rage, to retreat without fear. You have learned to see the invisible battlefield. And now, the final question is no longer whether you can outplay your enemies mentally. It is whether you will commit to living this way consistently. Because strategy without discipline is fantasy. Psychological mastery without daily practice is illusion. You must practice composure when provoked. You must practice restraint when tempted. You must practice clarity when confused. You must practice patience when rushed. And you must practice self-examination when pride swells. There will be days when you falter, when emotion slips through the cracks, when you react too quickly. Do not collapse into self-condemnation. Analyze, adjust, refine. Ruthlessness is not cruelty toward others. It is uncompromising honesty with yourself. The world will always contain manipulators, challengers, critics, competitors. That reality does not change. You can become the person who cannot be easily read, easily shaken, easily baited, easily controlled. You can become the strategist who understands that the mind is both weapon and shield. You can become the presence that shifts rooms without noise. But this transformation demands something from you. It demands that you abandon the comfort of impulsive reaction. It demands that you let go of the need to win every argument. It demands that you tolerate temporary misunderstanding for long-term positioning. It demands that you discipline your ego until it serves you rather than rules you. So decide. Will you continue living reactively, dancing to the provocations of every rival who seeks your attention, or will you rise into deliberate awareness, mastering your emotions, shaping perception, constructing influence quietly and relentlessly? Will you allow your enemies to define your state of mind, or will you redefine yourself so completely that their tactics dissolve before they reach you? Stand still for a moment. Feel the weight of that choice, because the most ruthless move you will ever make is not against them. It is against your former self. Step beyond impulsiveness. Step beyond the hunger for validation. Build discipline. Build clarity. Build inevitability. And from this moment forward, move through every confrontation with the calm of someone who understands the game, the patience of someone who sees beyond the moment, and the unshakable conviction of someone who has mastered the only mind that truly matters, yours.